When she said, "Don't go there after midnight," I smiled. I thought she was joking. In this town, people say all kinds of things when the sun goes down. Stories about shadows that walk on their own, about lights that flicker near the old bridge, about footsteps where no one is supposed to be. I used to laugh at them. I'm an old woman now, but back then I still believed the world was too ordinary for mystery. My name is Margaret, though most people just call me Maggie. I've lived in this small town for more than 40 years. It sits between soft hills and a narrow river that divides the newer houses from the older ones. We have one main street, one bakery, a little grocery that still writes bills by hand, and a post office that smells faintly of rain. Life here used to be simple. Quiet mornings, gossip over fences, the same faces at the Sunday market. Until the night I didn't listen. That evening began like many others. The air was cool, the moon was a thin slice above the rooftops. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea when Lena, my neighbor, walked by. She was a sweet young woman, about 22. Lively, curious, always talking about leaving town to see the city lights someday. I liked her. She reminded me of my younger self before the years started folding into one another. She stopped by my gate that night and said quietly, "Miss Maggie, if you ever find yourself near the old community hall after midnight, don't go inside." I laughed softly. "Oh, Lena, what a thing to say. Why would I be wandering about at midnight?" She didn't smile back. She whispered, "I mean it. Just promise me you won't." Her eyes looked tired, frightened even. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, she hurried off down the lane, her steps echoing against the pavement. I didn't think much of it then. People have superstitions here. Some say they hear crying near the river when the clock strikes 12. Others talk about strange lights moving across the fields. I always told myself it was just the wind in imagination. Still, that night, as I locked my door and turned off the lights, I found myself glancing toward the old community hall through my window. It stood at the end of our street, a square building with peeling white paint and broken windows. Once it hosted dances, town meetings, even weddings, but now it just waited, empty and silent, like a memory that refused to fade. In the morning, the world felt normal again. The smell of coffee, the sound of my neighbor's radio, the clatter of bicycles passing by. I went about my chores, watering the plants, feeding the stray cat that visited every day, writing a letter to my son who lived in another city. But every so often, Lena's words came back to me. "Don't go there after midnight." Why had she said it like that? What could possibly happen in that old hall? A week passed before I saw Lena again. She looked pale, her smile faint. When I asked if she was all right, she only nodded. That evening, as the sun sank, I walked to the small market near the square. People were closing their stalls. The air smelled of roasted corn and dust. Old Mr. Hayes, the butcher, waved at me. "Evening, Maggie," he said. "Heading home?" "Yes, just needed some bread." He looked toward the direction of the community hall and lowered his voice. "Strange noises again last night. You hear them?" I shook my head. "No, I sleep too early for that nonsense." He chuckled. "Probably kids, but it's odd, you know, always at midnight." There it was again, midnight. I told myself it was coincidence, but that night, as I lay in bed, the wind carried something faint. A sound, maybe, like distant humming. Days drifted by like slow water. Small towns have a rhythm of their own, familiar, gentle, until something small changes and the balance feels off. That small change began when Lena stopped coming outside. Her lights stayed off most evenings, her mail piled up. I started worrying. So one morning, I walked over to her house. The curtains were drawn. I knocked gently. "Lena, it's Miss Maggie." No answer. I left a note under her door. "Come by for tea when you can." But she never came. I told myself maybe she had gone to visit her family in the next town. Yet inside, I felt that quiet worry that only older people know. The kind that comes from years of watching life change suddenly, without warning. 2 nights later, I heard footsteps outside my window. Slow, soft, then gone. I peeked through the curtain, no one there. The street light flickered. I should have gone back to bed, but something, curiosity, maybe loneliness, pulled me to the window again. From there, I could see the old community hall at the end of the road. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing near its door, a slim figure, still and silent. Then the wind moved and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes and whispered to myself, "It's nothing, Maggie, just shadows." But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. The next morning, I met Mr. Hayes again at the shop. He said quietly, "Lena hasn't been seen since Sunday." My heart sank. He added, "Police think she might have gone to the city, left on her own." But that didn't sound like Lena. She wouldn't just leave without saying goodbye. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat in my living room, the clock ticking loud in the silence. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like fingertips. Midnight came, and with it that same faint humming sound again, like a low song carried through the air. This time I didn't ignore it. I stood up, wrapped my shawl around me, and opened the door. The street was empty, quiet except for the far-off murmur near the community hall. My feet moved before my mind could stop them. I walked slowly down the lane. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air was cold, even the street lights seemed dimmer. When I reached the edge of the hall, I stopped. It looked the same as always, abandoned, peeling paint, broken windows. Yet tonight it felt alive somehow, as if the walls were breathing softly. I told myself, "Just one look, Maggie, and then go back." I pushed the old gate. It creaked, a sound that seemed to echo into the night. Then from somewhere deep inside the hall came a voice. "Why did you come?" I froze. The voice was soft, almost like Lena's. "You weren't supposed to be here after midnight," it said again. I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The door of the hall stood slightly open, light spilling from inside. A warm, golden light, not frightening, just strange. Against every sensible thought in my head, I stepped closer. That's when I saw her, standing just inside the doorway. Pale but smiling was Lena. She looked calm, peaceful even. "Lena," I whispered. She nodded slowly. "I told you not to come here after midnight," she said. I blinked, trying to understand. "Where have you been? Everyone's worried." She tilted her head. "It's all right now, Miss Maggie. You can go home." I took a step forward, but she held up her hand. "Please, go before the clock strikes 1. Then the light faded, and she was gone. I don't remember walking home. I just remember sitting in my chair, trembling, watching the sky turn pale with dawn. The next morning, the police came again. They had found Lena, but not alive. She had drowned near the old bridge several nights ago, the same night she warned me not to go near the hall. I didn't tell anyone what I saw,
Who would believe an old woman saying she spoke to someone who was already gone? Instead, I kept quiet. I tended my garden. I fed the stray cat. I tried to carry on. But every night when the clock neared midnight, I thought of Lena's voice, soft, pleading, "Don't go there after midnight." I had gone anyway, and somehow I felt she had saved me from something worse, something that waited in that hall for whoever refused to listen.
That night changed me. I stopped laughing at warnings. Sometimes I sit by my window and see the faint light near the hall again. I whisper, "Thank you, Lena." And I mean it. Because some warnings aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to protect you. For days after they found Lena, I couldn't bring myself to walk past the old community hall. Even though it was only a few streets away, I took the longer route home just to avoid seeing its dark outline against the sky. People in town whispered about her death, but quietly, as if the air itself was listening. Some said she slipped on the bridge after rain. Others believed she had been meeting someone there. No one really knew. But everyone agreed on one thing. It happened around midnight. That word again. Midnight. The sound of it began to follow me everywhere. In the ticking of the clock, the church bell, even the way the streetlights buzzed at night. I spent my mornings trying to keep busy. I baked more than I needed. I rearranged the old photographs on my wall. My husband's smile in those pictures made me feel less alone. He had been gone for 10 years now, but his voice still lived somewhere inside me. Sometimes I would talk to him softly while folding laundry. "Do you think I imagined it?" I'd ask. And in the silence that followed, I almost heard him say, "No, Maggie, you saw what you saw." But still, part of me wanted to believe it was all a dream, that Lena had never appeared that night, that the light in the hall had just been my imagination. One afternoon, I decided to clean the attic. It was something I'd been putting off for months. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air as I opened boxes of forgotten years. Christmas cards, recipes, letters from my son when he was little. Then, near the bottom of one box, I found a photograph. It showed a group of young people standing in front of the community hall. The picture was faded, yellowed around the edges. I recognized one face. Lena's mother. She had passed away years ago, before Lena even finished school. I remembered her faintly. A kind woman who used to sing at the town festivals. But in this picture, she looked different, almost worried. Her hand rested protectively on her daughter's shoulder. Something about that photo made my chest tighten. I turned it over. On the back, written in faded ink, were 5 words. "Don't open the door again." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those words, about Lena's warning, and about that voice at the hall. The rain began around midnight, tapping softly against the window. I sat up, listening. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard humming again, faint, almost like a lullaby. I whispered, "Lena?" Nothing. Only the sound of rain. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Lena's warning wasn't just about danger. Maybe it was about something unfinished, something she wanted me to understand. The next morning, I went to see Clara, the oldest woman in town. Everyone called her Aunt Clara, though she wasn't anyone's real aunt. She knew the history of every building, every rumor, every name. When she opened the door, her eyes softened. "Maggie, dear, it's been too long. Come in." Her house smelled of lavender and old books. I sat by the fire as she poured tea. After a few minutes, I asked quietly, "Clara, do you remember the old community hall?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. "Of course I do. Why?" "Do you know if anything strange ever happened there?" She didn't answer right away. She stirred her tea slowly, then said, "Some places remember things, Maggie, and sometimes those memories don't fade just because people forget them." Her words gave me chills. "What do you mean?" I asked. Clara sighed. "Years ago, before you moved here, there was a fire. It started during a town dance. Faulty lights, they said. People got out, most of them, but one girl didn't. She was trapped inside." My hands tightened around the teacup. "What was her name?" "Eleanor Hayes," she said softly. "Mr. Hayes's sister." My breath caught. "Hayes, the butcher?" She nodded. "He never talks about it. He was only a boy then. She was 16. Sweet girl, full of dreams. After the fire, people started saying they could still hear music from the hall at night, but the town just boarded it up, pretending nothing happened." I whispered, "That was so long ago." Clara looked at me carefully. "Why are you asking, Maggie?" I hesitated. Then I told her about Lena, the warning, the voice, the light. She listened quietly, her eyes full of something like sorrow. When I finished, she took my hand. "Sometimes the living are drawn to the places where the past still aches," she said. "Maybe Lena saw something she wasn't meant to see, and maybe she tried to protect you from it." That night, I dreamed of the hall. It was bright again, filled with laughter and music. People danced, their faces blurred. In the center of it all stood a young girl in a blue dress, her hair shining like gold. She smiled at me, then turned toward the door. When she opened it, fire burst through, and everything went black. I woke up shaking. Outside, dawn was just beginning to color the sky. For days after that, I tried to ignore it. The dreams, the memories, the whisper of midnight. But every night, the same soft humming returned, a tune I couldn't name but somehow knew. It wasn't scary anymore. It was sad, like someone calling for help and knowing no one would come. I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. So I went back to the hall, this time in daylight. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The boards were loose, vines crawled up the sides. I pushed the gate open and stepped inside the yard. The door was locked, but one of the windows was broken. I could see the dusty floor, the remains of old chairs stacked against the wall, and a piano, half broken, but still standing. I whispered, "Hello?" Only silence answered. Then, as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the wall, a burn mark, shaped like a handprint. It was faint but clear. I touched it lightly. The wood beneath my fingers was cold, but my heart began to race. Later that evening, I went to see Mr. Hayes. He was closing up his shop. "Mr. Hayes," I said softly, "do you remember your sister, Eleanor?" He froze. The knife in his hand stopped mid-motion. He looked at me, his eyes full of something old and painful. "Why do you ask?" I hesitated, because I think what happened to her might be connected to Lena. He stared at me for a long time. Then he set the knife down and said, "Come tomorrow morning. I'll tell you what I know." That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing the burn mark, the photograph, Lena's smile. When morning came, I walked to the butcher shop. Mr. Hayes was waiting, sitting behind the counter with a box in front of him. He opened it carefully. Inside were old papers, photographs, and a small locket. She was my sister," he said quietly. "We were close. After the fire, they said it was an accident, but I never believed it." "Why not?" I asked. He sighed. She'd been meeting a boy secretly, someone older, from out of town. That night, she planned to tell him she couldn't see him anymore. He never showed up, but the fire started near the door, as if someone wanted to stop her from leaving. I felt a chill. He handed me the locket. Inside was a tiny picture of Eleanor, and beside it, a note. After midnight, meet me there. The words made my heart pound. I whispered, "So she went there after midnight," he nodded, "and she never came back." I walked home in silence, the locket heavy in my pocket. Everything suddenly felt connected. Eleanor, the fire, the warnings, the midnight hum. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched the sun fade. I could almost hear Lena's laughter in the wind. When the clock struck 12, the humming returned, clearer this time. The tune was the same one from my dream. I realized then it was a waltz, soft, slow, the kind people dance to at old town gatherings. And then I heard footsteps again, gentle, moving toward the hall. I stood. I didn't want to go, but something in me whispered, "If you don't, you'll never understand." So once more, I walked down that quiet road under the pale moonlight. The hall looked the same, still, silent, waiting. But this time, the door wasn't closed. It stood slightly open, just enough to show a thin line of light inside. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Lena?" I whispered. No answer. Inside, the light flickered softly, like candlelight. Then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps and music. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped in. The room was empty, except for that old piano in the corner. Its keys moved on their own, pressing down one by one, playing that same waltz. The air felt warm, almost gentle. Then a voice, clear and calm, filled the room. "Thank you for coming back." I turned, and there she was again. Not Lena this time, the girl in the blue dress from my dream. She looked at me with soft eyes, her face full of longing. "You were the only one who heard," she said. I whispered, "Who are you?" She said, "Eleanor. I've been waiting for someone to remember." The piano went silent. She reached out a hand, her smile trembling. "Tell my brother I'm sorry. Tell him I didn't mean to go. And tell the girl who warned you, she did well." And then she was gone, fading like mist in sunlight. When I came back to myself, the hall was dark again. The air smelled of dust and rain. I walked home slowly, the locket still warm in my pocket. The church bell rang once, 1 o'clock. I whispered, "Rest now, Eleanor. You're remembered." And for the first time in weeks, the town felt quiet again. That night, I slept deeply. No humming, no dreams, just peace. But I knew the story wasn't finished yet, because sometimes peace for the dead must come through the living. And there was still one person who needed to know the truth: Mr. Hayes. The morning after I saw the girl in blue, I woke with a strange calm inside me. The fear was gone, replaced with a quiet purpose I hadn't felt in years. I brewed my tea, opened the curtains, and watched the street come alive. Children ran past with school bags, the milk truck rattled by, the same life as always. But I knew something had changed, not in the town, but in me. I had promised Eleanor I would tell her brother, and I had promised myself I would understand what really happened that night, long ago. Mr. Hayes opened his shop at 8 sharp, like every day. When I walked in, he looked surprised. "Morning, Maggie," he said. "You look better today." "I am," I answered softly, "but there's something I need to show you." I placed the small silver locket on the counter. He stared at it for a long moment before touching it with his thick, trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" "It was at the hall," I said. "And there's more, Mr. Hayes. I think your sister's death wasn't what people believed." He took a deep breath. "I always knew that," he whispered. Then he locked the door, turned the sign to closed, and motioned for me to sit. The shop was silent, except for the humming of the old refrigerator. He looked down, his voice rough but steady. "The night of the fire," he began. "I was there too." I blinked. "You were?" He nodded slowly. "I was just a boy, but I followed her. I wanted to see who she was meeting. I was jealous, I guess. She was popular, everyone loved her. I thought she was slipping away from the family." He paused, swallowed hard. "I saw the man she met, older, wearing a dark coat. He gave her a letter. They argued. I couldn't hear the words. Then he left. She went back inside to get her shawl, and then the flames started near the door." His voice cracked. "I ran for help, but by the time anyone came, the place was gone." He looked at me. "No one believed me. They said faulty wiring. But I saw him drop something, a lantern. I remember the sound of glass breaking." I felt my throat tighten. "Did you ever find out who he was?" He shook his head. "No name, no address, only that he wasn't from around here. But years later, I saw a picture in the paper, a story about a man arrested for fraud. Same face. He'd moved from town to town, leaving trouble behind." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said, "So why now, after all these years?" I told him about Lena, about her warning, her fear, her sudden death. When I finished, he closed his eyes. "Her mother used to sing with Eleanor," he said quietly. "Maybe she told her stories about that night. Maybe Lena went there to prove something and got caught in her own curiosity." Then his eyes filled with tears. "You think she saw Eleanor?" "I think," I said gently, "she felt her, the pain that place still held, and she tried to protect others. Me, maybe others too." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Then I owe both of them my thanks." We decided to visit the hall together, one last time, not at midnight, but in daylight, when truth feels easier to face. The next morning, the sky was pale and clear. We walked slowly down the lane. He carried the locket in his hand. I carried a small bunch of wildflowers. When we reached the building, he stopped and stared at it for a long time. "I haven't been here since the night it burned," he murmured. The gate squeaked as we pushed it open. Inside, sunlight spilled through the broken roof, dust dancing in the beams. He walked to the corner where the stage used to be. "This was where she sang," he said softly. "Her voice could fill this whole hall." I placed the flowers on the floor. "Maybe it still does." He smiled faintly. "Maybe." We stood there in silence for a long time. Then he said, "You know, Maggie, I always blamed myself. I thought if I'd shouted louder, if I'd gone in after her." I touched his arm gently. "You were a child. You did what you could." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Maybe it's time I forgive myself," he whispered. And I think that was the moment everything changed. The hall felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. Outside, a soft wind passed through the trees, carrying away years of unspoken sorrow. After that day, the humming at midnight stopped. No more strange lights, no more footsteps. Just peace. The town moved on quietly, as small towns do. But something inside me kept tugging, a need to know more about the man who caused it all. Not for revenge, but for understanding. So I went to the library. The librarian, a kind young woman named Amy, helped me dig through old newspapers. Hours passed, pages rustled, the smell of old paper filled the air. Then we found it, an article from the year after the fire. Local businessman accused of fraud leaves town suddenly. His name, Charles Devlin. My heart stopped for a second. That name sounded familiar. Amy looked at me. "Does that mean something to you?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." He owned the mill near the river. I used to buy flour there when I first moved to town." She frowned. "He came back?" I said, "For a while. Then the mill closed." Something inside me whispered that the story wasn't quite over. I found his old address in the town records, a small cottage near the edge of the forest, abandoned for years. When I told Mr. Hayes, he offered to come with me, but I said, "No, this is something I need to do alone." He didn't argue. He just pressed the locket into my hand. "Take her with you," he said. The path to the cottage was overgrown, the trees whispering softly as I walked. It was almost evening, the sky painted in gold and gray. The cottage door creaked when I pushed it. Dust floated in the light like tiny ghosts of memory. Inside, everything was still. A broken chair, a cracked mirror, a photograph on the wall. I stepped closer to the photo. A man in a dark coat stood beside a young woman, Eleanor. The picture was scorched at the edges, as if someone had tried to burn it but couldn't. I felt a chill. Then I heard a sound, a cough, faint but real. A door opened behind me. An old man stepped out, thin and pale, his back slightly bent. He asked in a shaky voice, "Who's there?" I said, gently, "My name is Maggie. I didn't mean to intrude." He squinted at me. "No one comes here anymore. I was looking for someone named Charles Devlin." He laughed softly, without humor. "Then you've found him. What do you want?" I hesitated. Then I said, "The truth." He sat down slowly, motioning for me to do the same. His hands trembled as he poured tea from a dusty kettle. "I was young then," he said quietly. "Too proud, too careless. Eleanor wanted me to leave town with her. I told her I would. But that night, I changed my mind. I brought the lantern to scare her, to stop her from going. I never meant for the fire to spread." He looked at his hands as if they still carried the flame. "I tried to go back, but the smoke, I couldn't see. I ran." Silence filled the room. "I heard she died," he whispered. "I left town that same night. I've lived with it ever since." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You forgave you," I said softly. He looked up sharply. "How could she?" "Because she told me so," I whispered. "She only wanted to be remembered, and for her brother to forgive himself. That's all." He stared at me as if trying to decide whether to believe. Then his eyes softened, and he began to cry, quietly, like a man who hadn't let himself in decades. When I left the cottage, the sun was setting. The sky glowed orange, then purple, then deep blue. As I reached the edge of the path, I looked back. Charles Devlin sat by the doorway, the light from inside warm on his face. For the first time, he looked peaceful. That night, I walked to the bridge, the same place where they had found Lena. The river shimmered under the moon. I took the locket from my pocket and held it above the water. "Rest now," I whispered. "Both of you." Then I let it fall. It caught the moonlight once before sinking gently into the current. The ripples spread wide, then faded. And with them, the weight in my chest eased at last. When I returned home, the clock struck midnight. No humming, no whispering wind. Only silence. Deep, kind silence. I sat by the window, breathing slowly. The world felt new again. Maybe the past never truly leaves us, I thought. Maybe it just waits for us to listen, to make peace, and to remember. The next morning, the air smelled clean. It had rained during the night, a soft, steady rain that washed the dust from the streets and left tiny silver drops on every leaf. When I opened my window, the world felt lighter, as if it too had been holding its breath for years. For the first time in months, I wanted breakfast. I made porridge, sliced an apple, and brewed tea. As the kettle whistled, I caught myself humming the same little waltz I used to hear at midnight. It didn't frighten me now. It felt like a song of thanks. That afternoon, I went to see Mr. Hayes. He was sitting outside his shop, sharpening a knife, but his face looked softer, younger somehow. When he saw me, he smiled. "You went to see him, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Yes, he was there. Old, tired, but alive. He told me the truth. Mr. Hayes stared at the street for a long moment. "I never thought I'd hear that name again," he said. "What did you tell him?" I told him Eleanor forgave him. Because she did. I could feel it. He set the knife down, his hands trembling slightly. "Then maybe I can forgive him too." His voice cracked, but there was relief behind it. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of rainwater dripping from the roof. No words were needed. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need noise. It only needs time. The following Sunday, our little church was nearly full. Mr. Hayes had asked the pastor for a short service in memory of his sister and of Lena. Nothing grand, just candles, soft music, and quiet prayers. People came, some out of curiosity, some out of kindness. They filled the pews, old and young together. When the bell rang, I felt something stir in my heart. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was peace. The pastor spoke gently. Some stories take years to end. Some hearts take years to rest. Today we remember not only those who left us, but also those who stayed to carry the memory. Mr. Hayes stood and lit 2 candles, one for Eleanor, one for Lena. His hands didn't shake this time. When the music started, I recognized the melody, the waltz, the same tune that had haunted me for weeks. Someone had found it in an old town record and decided to play it again, not knowing its history. I smiled through tears. It sounded different now, brighter, whole. After the service, people lingered outside, talking softly. The sun had broken through the clouds, and the puddles on the street shimmered like small mirrors. Mrs. Clara came to me and squeezed my hand. "I told you, dear," she whispered. "Some places remember, but now they'll remember peace." I nodded. "You were right, Clara. Thank you." She smiled. "Don't thank me, Maggie. You were the one brave enough to listen." In the days that followed, the town slowly changed. The council decided to repair the old community hall instead of tearing it down. Volunteers came with hammers and paint. I helped where I could, mostly by bringing lemonade and sandwiches for the workers. It felt good to see life returning to that place. When the new doors were finally installed, someone asked me to speak at the reopening. At first I said no. I didn't like attention. But then I thought of Lena, her soft voice, her fear, her kindness, and I said yes. The day of the reopening was bright and clear. Children ran around with ribbons, the mayor gave a short speech, and people clapped politely. Then they handed me the microphone. My heart thumped, but when I looked at the crowd, my neighbors, friends, familiar faces, I felt only warmth. I began slowly. I moved to this town many years ago. It has given me more than I ever asked for: friendship, safety, and a sense of belonging. But sometimes, even in the quietest towns, pain hides behind silence. I paused, letting the wind fill the space. I continued. There once was a girl who sang here. Her name was Eleanor. And there was another years later who tried to protect someone she cared about. Her name was Lena. They both left us too soon, but they taught me, and maybe all of us, that the past doesn't vanish just because we stop talking about it. It waits, gently, for us to listen. I saw tears in more than one pair of eyes. Even the mayor looked down, thoughtful. So today I said softly, let this hall stand not as a memory of sorrow, but as a promise that we'll listen sooner, care deeper, and forgive quicker. The crowd was silent for a heartbeat, and then they began to clap. Not loud applause, just warm, steady, human applause. That evening, when everyone had gone home, I stayed behind for a while. The hall was empty again, but now it smelled of fresh paint and flowers. I walked to the center of the room and looked up at the ceiling, where sunlight slipped through the tall windows. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint hum, one note of the waltz, soft and distant. I smiled. Good night, I whispered, and the sound faded like a sigh of contentment. Life went on. The seasons changed. Summer brought the smell of cut grass. Autumn painted the trees. Winter wrapped the town in quiet white. I grew a little slower, my hands a little stiffer, but my heart lighter. Sometimes my son called from the city. He'd ask, "Mom, how are things back home?" And I'd tell him, "Peaceful, darling. The town's sleeping well these days." He'd laugh, not knowing what I meant, and that was fine. Some stories belong only to those who lived them. One afternoon, months later, a letter arrived. It was from Charles Devlin. His handwriting was shaky but clear. Dear Mrs. Maggie, thank you for coming that day. You gave an old man the chance to speak the words he should have said long ago. I've written to Mr. Hayes as well, though I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I sleep better now. I'm leaving town for a small home near the sea. Perhaps that's where peace lives. With gratitude, Charles. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my old recipe box, beside family photos and birthday cards, not because it was precious, but because it was proof that even broken lives can mend a little when truth is finally spoken. That night, as the clock neared midnight, I sat by the window again with a cup of tea. The moon was bright, silver light spilling across the street. The old hall stood quiet, proud, alive. No music, no whisper, only the soft hum of night insects and the sigh of wind through the trees. I thought of everyone I had lost, my husband, my friends, Lena, Eleanor, and I smiled. Loss doesn't mean the end of love. It just changes its shape. Sometimes love becomes memory. Sometimes it becomes courage. And sometimes it becomes a story, one that helps others listen a little closer to the hearts around them. A few weeks later, a young girl moved into Lena's old house. Her name was Nora. She was cheerful, full of life, always waving from the gate. One evening, she brought me a basket of cookies and asked, "Miss Maggie, what happened in that old building down the road? People say it used to be haunted." I smiled gently. "Not haunted, dear, just waiting to be forgiven." She looked puzzled but nodded politely. Maybe someday she'd understand. For now, it was enough that she felt safe walking past it, even after dark. Time has a way of softening everything. What once felt heavy becomes lighter. What once hurt becomes a lesson. Every so often, I still walk to the bridge. I stand there for a while, watching the water move, and I imagine the lockets somewhere beneath, resting quietly among the stones. And I whisper, "Thank you." To Lena, to Eleanor, to life itself. In small towns, stories travel like the wind, gently, persistently. People still mention that old tragedy now and then, but not with fear anymore. They speak of kindness, of courage, of forgiveness. And when they do, I feel proud, not of what I did, but of what we all became because of it. When she said, "Don't go there after midnight," I didn't believe her. I thought it was just superstition, just another small town story. But now I know some warnings are gifts. They remind us that every place, every heart, carries both darkness and light. And when we listen with kindness, even the darkest night can find its dawn. The years have passed softly, like pages turning in a book. Sometimes I forget how long it's been since that strange winter. The whispers, the firelight, the sleepless nights. Other times it feels like yesterday. But I don't mind remembering anymore. Memories, even the painful ones, are proof that we lived fully. The town has changed in small ways. The bakery now sells coffee and cinnamon rolls. The post office has a new sign. Children who once ran down the lanes with muddy shoes now walk their own children to school. And yet, on quiet evenings, when the sky turns gold and the air smells of rain, I can still hear the same gentle rhythm of life. Steady, patient, forgiving. The community hall stands proudly at the center. They hold dances there again, weddings, birthdays, small concerts. Whenever I pass by, I stop for a moment. I listen. I can almost hear Eleanor's song blending with laughter. That sound, half memory, half miracle, always makes me smile. Mr. Hayes still runs his little shop, though his hands are slower now. Every spring he plants flowers outside, blue ones, the same color as the dress his sister used to wear. He once told me, "It helps me remember the good parts, not just the ending." I understand that feeling very well. Sometimes he brings me a small loaf of bread, and we sit by the bench near the church, talking about ordinary things. Weather, recipes, the mayor's speeches. We don't talk much about that night anymore. We don't need to. Peace doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it's simply the silence we can finally share without pain. One evening, Nora, the young girl who moved into Lena's old house, came to visit me again. She's grown taller now, her hair always tied in a bright ribbon. She brought me tea biscuits she had baked herself. "Miss Maggie," she said, "do you ever get scared living alone?" I looked at her and smiled. "Not anymore, dear. Fear only lives where love hasn't entered yet." She thought about it, then nodded slowly. "Mom says you're like the grandmother everyone wishes they had." I laughed softly. "Oh, tell your mother she's too kind. I'm just someone who learned things the hard way." "Like what?" she asked curiously. I looked out the window at the fading sun. "That silence is not always emptiness," I said. "Sometimes it's healing, and that forgiveness is lighter to carry than blame." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she smiled. "I'll remember that." That night, after she left, I sat by my window again, the same spot where it had all begun. The moon hung low and soft over the rooftops. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a lullaby, not loneliness. I thought about how many times I had looked out of that same window, waiting, worrying, wondering, and now, after all these years, there was nothing left to wait for. Just peace, simple and whole. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to everyone who had crossed my path, the living and the gone, because each one of them had left a small piece of kindness behind, and those pieces had built the life I was still living. Sometimes I wonder if Eleanor and Lena know, if they can see the flowers by the hall, the children laughing, the music returning. If they do, I think they'd be smiling. Their story, once tangled in sorrow, had turned into something beautiful, a quiet reminder of how forgiveness can rebuild even the places that once burned. I believe that's what life is, really. A long walk through shadow and sunlight, through fear and love, until we learn to see them both as the same thing, parts of one whole heart. The clock in my living room chimed softly. Midnight again. I waited, listening. No humming this time, only the calm sound of the night wind through the trees. I smiled.
When she said, "Don't go there after midnight," I didn't believe her, I whispered. I do now, not because of fear, but because I've learned to listen. I finished my tea, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle gently around me. It wasn't an ending, really, just another beginning, wrapped in quiet peace. We can't always choose what stories life gives us, but we can choose how gently we tell them, and sometimes, by telling them with kindness, we find our way home again.